is not 4 o'clock yet. It is 4 o'clock, except the general manager is in the wrong seat.
Sorry, I did not want to leave the board.
All right, it's past 4 o'clock. Let's call the meeting to order. Andy?
Okay. Directors Huang,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
Weed, and Gunther.
Director Sethy, would you lead us in a prayer?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next item is public comment on matters of this notice of special meeting. I see no members of the public. So let's move on to item number 4, Water Resources Planning Workshop. Who's going to start?
Okay, thank you, Madam Vice President. Tonight, the board has scheduled a Water Resources Planning Workshop, and this is the second in a series of board workshops planned for this calendar year in 2020 that will focus on a number of water resources planning related topics, including forecast customer water demands, water use efficiency and conservation, long-term management of the district's imported and local water supply portfolio, future water supply opportunities, the current and future regulatory framework, and updates to the district's urban water management and integrated resources planning policies, criteria, and strategies. So with that, I will introduce our Manager of Water Resources, Laura Heides, to get us going this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaver. Wanted to welcome everybody and thank everybody, members of the board, staff, and we don't have any members of the public yet here, but thanks all for being here today. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a thank you to all the staff that are in attendance and who have supported the presentation. So we'll introduce people kind of as we go today, maybe with throughout the presentations, and turn it over to each other one by one if that works. And with that, I will kick it off. So the Water Resources team is really pleased to be here tonight to talk with the board about some of the important topics related to the district's long-term planning. And to give you a sense of what we'll be covering tonight, here's an agenda of what we'll be doing. We're going to get things going first by talking about dry year groundwater operations and delve into that discussion, including topics on history, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and discussion on planning level modeling of future scenarios. Throughout the discussion, you're going to hear a theme about balancing objectives. So I've noted that here too, and that makes sense since many of these topics are, while interesting, also very challenging, and we do have to do some balancing. And then next we'll discuss the district's recycled water planning and future direction. And for both of these topics tonight, we may pause at some key locations for discussion and input. And hearing the board's thoughts on these topics will be really helpful to us in helping guide the staff direction and help us with our proposed path moving forward to inform our analyses and next steps. So last, we'll do a quick wrap-up and discussion of the next steps on the schedule moving forward. So with that, we will just jump right in to the purpose. And I wanted to start by way of background to just pause a minute and talk about the overall purpose of the workshop series that we have going for 2019 and 2020. We're taking time to discuss some of these key planning objectives, criteria, and elements of the district's 1995 Integrated Resources Plan in light of changing times. What staff is really looking for is essentially the board's permission to step outside of the line, so to speak, of the district's guiding 1995 policy criteria for some of our planning level assessments. So this will allow us to evaluate the widest array of options moving forward for long-term water supplies and initiatives as we face decisions in the near term on various opportunities in front of us. So just to recap sort of where we're at, meeting number 1, our first meeting was held on July 25th earlier this year, and at that meeting we reviewed significant upcoming changes affecting water supplies and demands. We discussed some of the guiding policies from the 95 Integrated Resources Plan, including the level of service and including a few potential new planning objectives in our analyses. And we also received some really valuable input to inform from the board to inform our water efficiency master plan that is in progress. And I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you from our whole team for the input that the board provided last time around. It really did help us moving forward on those topics. And we covered a lot of ground, and we even did the DOT exercise last time, which provided some great feedback for us. And so we're especially thankful of everybody being willing to do that. And we promise no dots tonight. So to give you sort of a sense of some of our takeaways from the first meeting, we've put together this table. And stop me if I've captured anything incorrectly, but we wanted to sort of go through those prior to jumping into tonight's topic. So here's some of what our takeaways were and what we're doing with them. So on the left, you have sort of our takeaway and the feedback we received, and on the right, our staff actions. On the level of service goal that we discussed last time around, we heard that the board is willing to evaluate both an 80% and a 90% level of service. So staff is including both of those possibilities in our modeling to look at a wider range of cost-effective future planning scenarios. On potential new planning objectives, we heard that there's interest in understanding how resiliency, climate readiness, and future readiness or enhanced flexibility fit into different options we may be evaluating. So we'll be including those potential objectives in the discussion and evaluation of our future planning scenarios. And on water conservation and water use efficiency, our takeaway was that the board was generally content with the current level of planning and that the board is interested in looking at cost-effective conservation options before making more costly capital investments. And this feedback was provided to the Water Efficiency Master Plan team to assist in the development of the plan and packages that will be coming back to the board for consideration, and also to inform the customer survey that will be kicking off shortly. That will evaluate our customers' knowledge, habits, and use of water conservation measures and fixtures, as well as explore customer interest in future conservation programming. So last but not least, we certainly did hear also the theme of cost in our many discussions. So we've captured that here, that cost is a top priority and interest of the board, and as a result, of course, staff will continue to provide cost information for all of the analyses and that we do to inform board decisions. So again, a huge thank you for your input and participation last time, and we look forward to another fun discussion tonight. So just to capture briefly the purpose of tonight's workshop, we plan to review and receive feedback from the board on our dry year groundwater usage constraints that were established in the 1995 IRP. We hope to review and receive feedback and direction for our water reuse planning. And we'd also like to confirm feedback received at the end of the night so that we can capture everything and inform our future planning level analyses. Oops. Okay, sorry. Different buttons here. We also included in tonight's packet an acronym key. I'm not going to go over this in great detail because we're going to explain all these things throughout our presentation. We just thought it might be nice to have that up front for folks that may not be familiar or may be viewing the presentation later, to have it all in one place as a quick, easy reference. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that unless there's specific questions at this time on that. Okay. Hearing none? All right. So tonight's dry year groundwater discussion. As we begin to move into this first topic of using our dry year groundwater reserve, the team wanted to put this discussion in perspective. So this is intended to be a general discussion only, and we're not proposing any operational changes at this time, and we're not asking the board to take any action. But the ideas we're discussing tonight are simply meant to inform planning level modeling analyses of the long-term water supply alternatives in front of us. And of course, any changes to policy or objectives. Hi there, welcome. Welcome. All right, so do I need to pause or anything, Bob, or do you want to keep moving? I'll get through this first bit. Great. So the idea is, back to where I was. Any changes to policy objectives and criteria would be pursued through a full integrated resources plan update, which we're planning to complete in the time period of 2023 to 2025, and that whole process would be done with a stakeholder engagement process and with full input from the public on changing any of those policies or plans. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our Water Supply and Planning Manager, Mr. Thomas Nizer, who will be taking us into the great details of the first topic on dry year groundwater reserves. So, thank you, Mr. Nizer.
Actually, can I just have you hold off on that since we have public members joining us? Would you wish to make a comment to the board? If you do, will we open the public comment period for you? No? Hearing none, then we'll continue today's comment.
Thank you, Ms. Hayden. I just noticed that our acronym key didn't include ACWD, by the way. Thanks. So before we get started, I want to take a moment to sort of reemphasize, for the benefit of the folks who just joined us, what Laura just shared previously about what the objectives of these workshops. ACWD's planning group is bounded by planning policies and criteria that were established in 1995. And I like to think of them as sort of defining a space that we work in. We've got cost, we've got level of service, and tonight we've got groundwater utilization goals, and they kind of define this space. And what we've found in recent years is these goals plus changing conditions are sort of crushing in on us a bit. And so we were reevaluating those points that define our working space that we can push out a bit on, so that we could maximize that space where we can continue to search for the optimal solutions that balance all of those competing pressures that Laura mentioned. So with that, we mentioned in July, we started with level of service goals where we discussed flexing our existing policy of 90% level of service or no more than 10% shortfall to an 80% level, considering changing that with our next policy update, as well as objectives and guiding information needed for shaping our water conservation program. And as mentioned tonight, we are looking at the use of groundwater reserves, dry year groundwater reserves, as well as our water resources planning objectives for development of a water reuse or recycled water system. As a refresher for the board and for the benefit of our visitors, our master planning document, the Integrated Resources Plan, or IRP, sort of structured as a set of top-level policy objectives followed by an evaluation criteria for that objective, and then strategy elements, which are the specific projects geared towards addressing ultimately that policy objective. Tonight we're going to be talking about the policy objective, greater objective of environmental impacts with the guiding principle of avoiding or mitigating, and with regard specifically to protecting our groundwater resources, our existing limit of not drawing our basin down more than 5 feet below sea level. So what we're talking about is when we go into a drought and our imported supplies and local watershed supplies are limited, and we're having to rely more and more on previously banked groundwater, that by the end of the drought we will not exceed 5 feet below sea level. That's our existing policy that was set in '95. And amongst the many strategy elements that help us live within that parameter, we're also going to talk specifically about recycled water planning. So before we go too far, we want to get some terminology sort of straightened out. It has been a number of years, 20 plus years, since the IRP was first authored. In the 1995 IRP, we used the term dry year mining, and we use that term to describe the use of local supplies in our local aquifer, and in particular in the dry year where we're pumping more water out of the basin than we are able to put in within that same year. Okay, so we used the term dry year mining back then. Some water. The wind is picking up too much dust. Another term we'll be using is conjunctive use groundwater management. There are two types of that, active and passive. We do both, but the active form of that is the act of physically putting surplus wet year water into the groundwater basin for use in a future dry year. And ACWD practices a sustainable conjunctive use management program that now cone. What that means is in the long term, over a span of pretty much any number of years, we don't pump out more than us or private users. We don't take more out than is reliably recharged to the basin. So, since 1995, we've had the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act very recently. And in STGMA, which you'll be hearing about shortly from our groundwater manager, Michelle Myers, there's a lot of sensitivity around the term mining, because mining usually suggests an unsustainable operation. Our definition of dry year mining is, within the greater context, a sustainable operation, but and our policy objective for managing groundwater is it's implicit that we sustainably manage the basin. So instead of using the term dry year mining tonight, I'm going to use the term use of dry year reserves. And we have reserves in off-site and semi-tropic. We could potentially bank reserves into state water project facilities as well. Unless I mention otherwise, we're talking about management of the Niles Cone. So with that, we'll have to get a little bit of background on how we plan to use our groundwater basin and how we're using it today and what we're kind of proposing changing or considering changing moving into the future. Before moving on, it's good to pause here and start with, for those who know our operations, we're 30% dependent on groundwater. And while that's less than a majority of our water, ACWD is and always has been a groundwater management agency. We were formed around protecting the Niles Cone Basin. And the sustainability of Niles Cone was challenged when the sustainable yield of the local system was not enough to keep up with the demand of the region. And over decades, we pursued the import of supplies from San Francisco and then later from the State Water Project. But what we found, notably in the 87 to 92 drought, was that those imported supplies are not nearly as reliable as they were originally built to be. And the IRP really identified the value of having the Niles Cone, the sort of bird in hand, I usually like to refer to it. It's our water supply, it's underneath our feet. And the importance of that became very evident, and the 1995 IRP really focused on prioritizing cleaning it up and using it more effectively in consideration of our imported supplies as well. So the 1995 IRP, I'll do this quickly, excuse me, considered a wide variety of ways to operate the groundwater basin, considered salinity barrier wells. This was a program started by Department of Water Resources in the 80s or 60s or sometime earlier. Looking at our aquifer recovery program, which tries to pump salt-contaminated water out of the groundwater basin, different ways to maximize that and optimize it with the continued potable production of water at our Maori well field. Looking at desalinating that brackish water that we were just discharging to the bay. Various ways to mix and bring the groundwater into our portfolio, to blend it, to provide it pure, to have various blend ratios at different times of year and at different types of years. And then dry year mining. Our history, the basin has been down as low as 60 feet below sea level. In the analyses in the 1990s, there was evaluation of, during droughts, considering going down as low as minus 40 feet. The recommendations that came out of the extensive studies in 1995 included abandoning the salt barrier wells, salinity barrier wells, to build an 8 MGD desalination facility to recover the discharged brackish water from our aquifer recovery program, to have a varied ARP pumping program that was in balance in concert with our potable production schemes, to establish a year-round hardness goal of 150 ppm, and notably during critical years that we wouldn't make water at a harder blend than 150. To manage groundwater during normal years to always be above 3 feet, positive 3 feet above sea level. And specific to tonight's conversation, to limit our dry year mining to minus 5 feet. And I should clarify one thing. When we do a referential statement back to the 95 IRP, we'll continue to use the printed term dry year mining so that anybody who compares the presentation with the actual print document knows what we're talking about. When we're prospective looking forward, we'll talk about use of dry year supplies.
I have a question here. Why, back in 1995, did they come up with such a narrow range between +3 and -5? It doesn't seem like you give yourself a lot of operating room.
I'll get to some of that, but I'll hit it at the high level. When we stay above 3 feet on the forebay, that will ensure that we are always above sea level at the bay interface. So that was sort of the bottom level that we could bring the Niles cone near, say, our well field. That's as far down as we could bring the well there safely to continue the bayward management of a salt flow. So that was really geared towards cleaning up the basin in all non-dry years. Originally, we weren't even going to go to -5. The original IRP said never go below 1 foot up until, I think, year 2000, then to sea level, then to -5. So it was considering a progressive cleaning up of our basin that with time we would be able to draw it down further and further. So it actually implicitly has a cleanup and an expanded freshwater storage built into those guidelines.
Director Sethy, this defines the lower end of the range. So there's the normal low, which is like 3 above, and then absolute low, -5. But on the upper end of the range, on the below the fault basin, we go up as high as 20 feet. So the range is really that.
Correct. And as you'll see here in a moment, our operations today are actually even more, a little bit more conservative than that. That was sort of a normal year worst case, as the general manager clarified. So today, big change is that we don't have these dynamic ARP rules anymore. We kind of have static ARP production, and that's because we built not only a slightly larger desalination facility, we've learned as we're using desal more as a baseline production facility and not as an opportunistic thing to take advantage of available ARP water, that we're running desal heavily all the time, and those ARP wells are running so much more than the Maori well field that we don't need to get really complex in how we optimize that pumping ratio. We hit 150 ppm year-round now, but we've also found that, and we learned this in 2014 as well, that we need to be optimal with our supplies during droughts, and we shouldn't be restricted to trying to target a certain level of hardness at the detriment of other elements of water supply optimization. So we consider a flex target for hardness that the board approves if the operations and executive staff team agree that we should, not the board, the executive management team will make give us a go-ahead to flex the hardness target opportunistically if it makes sense for the district's bigger interest. We did that quite a few times over the past few years. We keep a normal year level, so now the minimum of 10 feet. So while it was recommended to stay above 3, we're pretty much always 10 feet to 20 feet, 20 feet being basically full. And we operate with the dry year mining minimum of -5 feet, which we actually haven't hit since 1995. The lowest we got was 1 foot above sea level, one and some change at the nadir of the drought. So what does this all look like? You may have seen these charts many times, just a little bit deeper understanding of what goes into these charts. These are just simply guidelines that have been developed to dictate how we use our various supplies as the Niles cone is able or unable to stay at certain elevations. These dictate when we need to buy more San Francisco supply, when we should be importing water from semi-tropic. And all of that was developed with robust modeling to make sure that we do two things. We never exceed a 10% shortfall in a drought, and at the end of a design drought, we never go below 5 feet, -5 feet below sea level. So the question is before the board tonight is to discuss whether or not the board would like staff, because we're going down the path of reevaluating a number of water supply initiatives, and prior to our next major update in our planning, next IRP update, is would the board like staff to evaluate planning solutions that consider a deep recycling of the Niles cone. Stepping back to our policy objectives, the environmental, minimizing and avoiding and minimizing environmental impacts, sustainability is cooked into this. We can't entertain options that are not sustainable. But the question is, can we now at this point take the basin lower than our previous plans of -5 feet sustainably? And we believe there's good potential that we can do that with our existing infrastructure. We made investments in Quarry Lakes and desal, And we think between the facilities we have, we can sustainably operate the basin to take more water out and to recover it in a meaningful time that will prevent any negative impacts to the basin, potentially. There might be some small projects needed, but we think there's a good potential for this sort of an approach to managing our supply that could potentially avoid some major other investments in water supply initiatives. So a few things for consideration before we go further. So why, and I think this might speak a little bit to why we talk about -5 feet as being the bottom during a drought. There's a few factors. One, first thing in 1995, the salinity and the chlorides throughout Niles Cone were much higher than they are today. Were they still at the fault line in 95? They weren't at the fault, but they were substantially eastward. So the basin was quite salty. Quarry Lakes hadn't been regraded, so we couldn't bring the basin reliably up to 20 feet. The desalination didn't exist at the time, so we had to pump this water out of the basin and discharge it. Well, now 70% of that we convert into potable supply, and that's directly offset the demand for pumping at the Mowry well fields. Our modeling at the time, actually we didn't have water quality groundwater modeling at the time. So the modeling capability needed to accommodate for major new developments, so we needed to calibrate our models and once we had real data, but we also didn't have the ability to analyze the effects of managing the salt in the basin with computer models at that time. The plan did acknowledge that the purpose of cleaning up the basin is to increase freshwater storage in the basin for beneficial use. And the IRP itself did recommend that with time, this operating concept should be reevaluated. Basically, as our strategy elements, the Quarry Lakes and desal and semi-tropic and all these other facilities were brought online and helped us to restore the basin, that it would be time to reevaluate these things with better computing capabilities. And that's kind of where we are. A couple things I'll note before I move on here is that I don't really know when sea level rise kind of hit the scene, but I think in 1995 it was probably two very wonky academics sitting in Scripps University that knew about it and nobody else. Sea level rise is a very real thing and it will affect our ability to operate the groundwater basin. And another thing is the establishment of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, which now sets a broader criteria for how we manage the basin in coordination with other regional entities. And so in order to discuss any change in our operations, we need to understand SGMA and how that fits into it. So with that, I'd like to invite Michelle Myers, to come up, our groundwater division manager, and talk a little bit about SGMA.
Thank you, Mr. Mather. All right. Okay, so today I'll be talking about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and where we currently are in the process, as well as some SGMA terminology, the district's management of groundwater resources in SGMA terms, and how planning and SGMA work together, and the near-term next steps. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was enacted in 2014, and it changed how groundwater is managed throughout the state. The district is identified in SGMA as an agency created by statute to manage groundwater and is deemed to be the exclusive local agency within its statutory boundary to comply with SGMA. SGMA also identifies stakeholders or parties in the Act. This graphic provided by the Department of Water Resources shows stakeholders or parties such as DWR, who's the regulatory agency and also provides technical assistance, the State Water Resources Control Board, who's the enforcing agency, and groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, who are responsible for planning and implementation under the Act. And the naming of stakeholders, which includes beneficial users and uses of the groundwater basin, such as well owners and operators, local land use planning agencies, and others. And some key dates are also listed on the slide. The first is in 2016, the district became the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the Niles Cone. And on July 17, 2019, the district's alternative to a Groundwater Sustainability Plan, or alternative, was approved by DWR. So this map shows the district's groundwater statutory service area boundary, which is the blue solid line, and the 2016 approved DWR Bulletin 118 Niles Cone groundwater basin boundary, which is the pink dashed line. And you can see that the Niles Cone incorporates most of Fremont, all of Newark, parts of most of Union City, as well as parts of South Haver. So the district's alternative reflects existing recognized authority and framework for management of groundwater. It continues the district's existing programs and practices and preserves the successful sustainable management already being performed by the district. So now that DWR has approved the district's alternative, what's next? Every 5 years, the district must submit an alternative update for reevaluation by the Department of Water Resources. The first alternative update is due on January 1st, 2022. This closely coincides with when groundwater sustainability plans are due for other medium or high priority basins that are not critically overdraft, which is on January 31st, 2022. The district's alternatives identified a few areas specifically related to the groundwater model where improvements could be made due to the limitations from the existing model platform. So a groundwater model upgrade project was proposed. In DWR's approval, they included 7 recommended actions or improvements that they believe will enhance the alternative update for the district, and a number of the recommendations provided by DWR will be informed by the model upgrade, and others through additional information and explanation. Therefore, incorporating the groundwater model upgrade project with the 7 recommended actions outlined by DWR in the district's alternative update would be cost-effective and appropriate. Now, in addition to that, the timing was actually ideal because the state also released grant funding. Yes, Director Sethy?
Why is it called alternative update rather than just an update?
That's DWR's terminology, so we've been going with it. So I think that because there'll be also GSP updates, probably to distinguish the two. So, because the timing's also different.
I went through the pre-reading and I was a little bit confused by the word alternative.
Okay.
It sounds like you're changing or have the possibility of changes.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a statutory sigma track,
Okay.
and then there's the alternative. And we're on the alternative track, and therefore we're kind of, stuck, for a better word, with it. We're on the alternative track. So our plan is an alternative, right?
We're on the alternative track, and we're doing an update to
Right.
Yes.
So
Got it.
In 2022 is what
Got
it's due. Okay. So the state released grant funding opportunities, and so at the regular Board of Directors meeting on October 10th, 2019, they authorized the submittal of a grant application for the alternative update and model upgrade project, and the estimated combined project cost is $1.2 million. So the next 2 slides have graphics from the Department of Water Resources and present some general SIGMA information. So at the bottom of the pyramid are the 6 undesirable results identified in SIGMA, and I have another slide that talks more about those. But DWR created this pyramid to demonstrate that if a groundwater basin is being managed to avoid undesirable results, and it's important to keep in mind that undesirable results are significant and unreasonable by definition. And then, so if they're being managed if there's an avoidance of the undesirable results, so if you're not seeing anything in your basin, then it leads to the next process, which is sustainable yield. Therefore, the basin is likely operating within their sustainable yield. Then that demonstrates sustainable groundwater management, or at least you're on the path to sustainable groundwater management, which takes you to the ultimate goal, which is your sustainability goal. And it's achieved. So what are the 6 undesirable results? As defined in SIGMA, they're chronic lowering of groundwater levels, indicating a significant and unreasonable depletion of supply if continued over the planning and implementation horizon under SIGMA. Significant and unreasonable reduction of groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, including the migration of contaminant plumes that impair water supplies, land subsidence that substantially interferes with surface land uses, depletions of interconnected surface water that have adverse effects on beneficial uses of surface water. And the 6 items are more commonly referred to as sustainability indicators, and those are the effects caused by groundwater conditions that could become undesirable results if they are significant and unreasonable. So now this leads to the district's management of groundwater resources in segment terms. So the district's alternative explains how the Niles Cone Basin is split into two sub-basins or management areas. The first is the above Hayward Fault, or AHF sub-basin, and the second is the below Hayward Fault, or VHS sub-basin. They were separated because of how the Hayward Fault, which is shown on the map as the black dashed line, impedes the westward flow of groundwater. Large differences of groundwater levels on either side of the fault demonstrate the relatively impermeability nature of the fault. So the alternative identifies which potential undesirable results may apply to each subbasin or management area. Management area is a segment term, by the way. And you can see from the chart that under current operating condition, the potential undesirable result in the above Hayward Fault Basin is lowering of groundwater levels, but this is in terms of declining well yields, and that's specifically for a shallow well that's located in that part of the basin. And then for the below Hayward Fault, the potential is seawater intrusion, which historically we have seen. So how do we currently avoid undesirable results? This is accomplished through the sustainability indicators and the use of minimum thresholds. Maintaining groundwater elevations higher than the thresholds will avoid undesirable results. But we also look at chloride concentrations to see how things are going when it comes to saltwater intrusion. But to put it simply, add enough recharge and don't overpump. Which then ties back to utilizing the district's existing groundwater level conditions. Any future changes must be fully evaluated for all 6 sustainability indicators to determine if any undesirable results to be experienced. So as Mr. Neiser mentioned, a short-term level of -5 feet mean sea level at the below Hayward Fault indicator well is the expected worst case for a multi-year critical drought. But it's important to note in SGMA that when there's a discussion over groundwater levels and sustainability, that overdraft during a period of drought is not sufficient to establish a chronic lowering of groundwater levels if those extractions and recharge are managed to ensure that the reductions in groundwater levels or storage during the period of drought are offset by increases to groundwater levels or storage during other periods. So that's important to keep in mind. Okay, so some programs that help ensure operating within a basin's sustainable yield are artificial recharge, integrated planning and operations, groundwater monitoring, checking the health of the basin, annual reporting, conservation, which has and will continue to meet the sustainable yield of the basin. This is not an all-exclusive list, by the way. There's a lot of other things that take place to help that. So this graph is a great example of key actions taken by the district through its history, where successful integrated planning, operations, programs, and projects have taken place. And it shows the recovery of the Newark Aquifer, which is in the below Hayward Fault subbasin, which is connected to the bay. So that's where the saltwater intrusion comes into the below Hayward Fault basin. And this shows the recovery of it over sea level, and you can see over time how it's recovered. There have been some dips where the levels have been lowered, but those were to accommodate actual construction projects that were taking place in the basin. Okay, so planning in SGMA. So planning is an important function of the Replenishment Assessment Act of the Alameda County Water District, which was enacted in 1961 and is addressed annually in the district survey report on groundwater conditions, also referred to as the survey report. So to put it this simply, it's basically an annual groundwater budget process that we go through here at the district. So the survey report estimates the total amount of groundwater production for the coming year, estimates the total amount of groundwater recharge required, determines the extent of any salinity intrusion into the groundwater basin, and analyzes the effects of production and recharge on groundwater levels within the basin. Every year the same process is followed, and as a result, it is a key component of the district's planning efforts regarding groundwater management. However, there's also other planning tools that are used and actually can feed into the survey report analysis, and those are the integrated resources planning studies, urban water management plans, city general plans, and there's also projects listed in the district's 25 years capital improvement program. Input data utilized for the survey report is also used in the district's longer-term integrated resources planning efforts. So integrated resources planning is used to test water supply initiatives, concepts, and operating scenarios. It also simulates groundwater supply needs. The groundwater model, in turn, verifies predicted groundwater storage and compares to sustainability criteria or values of minimum and maximum targeted groundwater levels, which can be an iterative process. So looking forward when it comes to long-term planning and SGMA, as previously mentioned, the alternative update is due on January 1st, 2022, where current groundwater operation criteria is expected to be maintained. There is a planned integrated resources plan update that's been mentioned that is expected to begin in 2023 and to be completed by 2025. The IRP update will then be incorporated into the district's 2027 alternative update submittal.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
How do we build in any kind of variability that we might see, like particularly related to water demand data, if it's based on the city's general plan, considering that a general plan can be amended significantly?
We normally work with water supply and planning on that, so I'll let Thomas answer.
I might almost look to our council for that, but the long and short is we rely on the general plans and land-based demand studies to predict what future demand will be. And to the point of your question, those plans may change. The city does have to go through a CEQA process when they want to make any significant changes to their zoning, and we review those in due course with any other CEQA notice for potential impacts to water supply, as well as all the other myriad of the things that are concerned.
I was going to say, but Thomas, we also participate in the general plan update. Whenever we get a notice, we do monitor and review and provide comments.
Correct. Yeah,
and we do give them our opinion, a point of view on water supply impacts. And certain projects do have to go through a large project. One is the plan or outright will have to go through water supply assessment. If for some reason it would cost us having a shortfall, we do have in the past asked for mitigation. Is that correct?
That is correct. The water supply assessment is required for any large project that meets the threshold, whether it is or is not in the city plan. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they require a change in zoning to accommodate the project. Sometimes they're simply planned projects, but we still have to do that additional analysis. That's correct.
And there's a period of time that happens between when the city actually updates its general plan and when the growth actually happens. So there's an opportunity for us to make adjustments in our own planning, and there's a certain amount of flexibility, and the board's involved in that each year as we go through our sort of development fees and charges, so that the revenue is there to support potentially the additional facilities that will be required as a result of the growth.
And if there's a new water well going in anywhere within the Niles County, so either through permits or through MOUs, agreements and stuff, that we're notified and we work on, and we know what they're expected pumping in and everything like that, in addition to the CEQA process. Okay, so near-term next steps. So continue implementing the alternative and submitting annual reports to the department. Submit the grant application, which is due on November 1st for the alternative update and model upgrade project. And the alternative update is due once again on January 1st, 2022. And to continue to coordinate with adjacent basins, as well as ongoing coordination with planning efforts and IRP updates. So with that, I will hand it back to Mr. Kaiser, who will talk about some planning level modeling of future scenarios.
So if it's helpful to explain that interlude, as we wanted to address the new legislation, SGMA's a new product, basically going to pick up right where I left off. But we wanted to make sure everyone understands how the topic of drawing down the basin complies with the new law. So I hope that was useful. And I think at this point, if there's further questions regarding my topic and Michelle's, we can flow with it. So what are we talking about tonight? We said we wanted to talk about the idea of bringing down the basin deeper during a drought. So I want to be perfectly clear what we're talking about so that we understand the potential value, as well as the potential concerns. What you have in front of you here, the board has seen this before for the benefit of our visitors. This is a time series of simulated from our modeling groundwater level data going through a simulated covering of the 1987 to 1992 extended year drought, which is our drought of record for our urban water management plan. Using historic hydrology, it's the worst 5 years in the 80-plus years of planning hydrology we work with, commonly used throughout the state, and as the board heard extensively ad nauseum in July, we referred to as the planning hydrology. This is how we comply with the urban water management plan requirements in terms of reporting our reliability going into drought so that we can support present and future demands for water. Right here, this line indicates in blue roughly sea level elevation for groundwater. Everything here is positive, and anything below would be below sea level. And as you can see, these high peaks here, this is roughly 20 feet, which is the pretty much the saturated full groundwater basin. So we're using an example here tonight to help understand what we want to explore. I'll also note that we're talking about, as the board's aware from July, an eco-SED future for the benefit of our visitors. Eco-SED is referring to a series of assumptions on imposed regulatory actions that would reduce the availability of state water and San Francisco's Hetch-Hetchy water supplies, which are ultimately 60% of our total supply. That's our imported supply. These are in the process through the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan, are being reviewed. There's going to be reductions in available supply on these sources, plus many others. And this data set is assuming the proposed 40% unimpaired flow criteria that the state board is striving to achieve. This is up in the air. There's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not this will be enacted, but we are going to be giving up water supplies. We use this as a proxy for a future worst-case scenario of imported supplies. To understand what we're looking at, getting back to how we use our planning criteria, ACWD's modeling simulates getting through this drought where by the end of 1992, sort of the end of the extended drought, we never go below we never go more than 5 feet below sea level, while also not exceeding our level of service goals or exceeding our shortfall, which normally in our planning is that we don't go more than 10% shortage. In this scenario with eco-SED, and as the board has heard, we're looking at not exceeding, having up to a 30% shortfall, or what would be called a 70% level of service. So here you can see, this spoiler, you can't see it, but there's water down here. Okay, the basin has gone substantially below sea level in the past, but we manage it with the assumption that we can't go more than 5 feet below sea level. So the question is, well, geez, at 30%, we are not meeting anywhere near our level of service goal, not even if we modify it to 20. What if we pumped the groundwater basin some more and took advantage of this water? Would that be a sustainable operation? We do know from the historic droughts that we analyzed that there's always wet periods that follow dry periods, or at least in the record that we're working with today in California. And as you can see, we pretty much within a couple of years, or my wife would kill me, a few years, couple is 2, within 3 years we refill the basin completely. And the point there is that we have the diversion facilities, we have the off-stream recharge capacity, and we have the water rights on Alameda Creek, and the watershed actually has a lot more water than we can typically take advantage of. So a couple of good wet years, and we are, or a few, we are always able to, from our historic record, refill the basin to full conditions. The big question is, as Ms. Myers was referring to in sustainability criteria, what happens during this period? Is there saline intrusion from the bay? Is there land subsidence? Is there stream bed depletion? 3 more things, I forget what they are offhand. So are we meeting sustainability during that period? And our analyses today say yes, we are. So we feel very comfortable that we can do this operation. What we don't like is seeing 30% shortfall. So now that we're losing supply and we can't meet our level of service goal, one option is to consider operating the basin a little bit deeper. So Devin, who you've met here, has been doing some really interesting modeling work and exploring what if we changed our operations and allowed us to go deeper during the nadir of the drought, those driest years and that lowest point in the basin. What level could we take it down to that would be able to give us as high as a 90% level of service, getting back to our original goal? We're getting at 80%, we're looking at 90%, but how much more stressing of the groundwater basin would it take to meet these reliability goals that we like? And from this modeling, this is just using Maori wells and desal. This isn't requiring any new infrastructure at all. As you can see from that purple line, pretty much in the same time span, we fully recharge the basin. So we brought it down lower, but as mentioned, we have the capacity, we have the water rights, and the watershed has the supply to refill that basin pretty much in the same time frame. So the questions are, is this not sustainable? Is this a manageable scenario? Now, we're bound by our existing policies to always consider minus 5 feet, and so we were looking for as Laura mentioned earlier, for permission to step outside the lines and consider deeper scenarios. There's two reasons we're asking. The first one being that this is a board policy, so we assume that we're not allowed to just willy-nilly go out and break the board policy. And going and analyzing things takes a lot of time and effort. We do have to do a lot of work on our existing models and the groundwater model to make sure that they are simulating the groundwater conditions appropriately. We have to spend some time and a little bit of resources to do these analyses. So we felt that we need the board's permission to consider this if it so moves the board. But preliminarily, we're seeing, there's a potential that if we could increase the use of those dry year reserves, it could provide much of the water supply benefits that we are seeing from other water supply initiatives that we're evaluating, including IPR, the Keros, even conveyance alternatives. That we're talking once every 30 years or so, needing to just tap into that basin a little bit more if it could be done sustainably. Could be done with very limited investment. So at a staff level, we recommend that we study these options and we add these to our existing array of water supply initiatives that the board is considering in these upcoming couple of years before we make decisions. So with that, we'd like to pause for discussion.
On that model, Thomas,
Sure.
how deep, what is the deepest level right there?
There's no numbers, so it's negative infinity. No, it's on the order, for this scenario, it's maybe 8 to 12 feet. Our models aren't calibrated for this operation, so that's part of that effort we need to put in to make these models representative.
On your blue line, at the very lowest,
Yeah.
what would that be?
This is on the order of 8 to 12 feet, but what I'm fumbling with saying is, I'm not sure. This model hasn't been dialed in and calibrated enough to say for sure.
Yeah.
So that would be the work we need to do to improve the modeling to say definitively what it is. And then more importantly, with the groundwater group in the more robust groundwater model to test the sustainability. But it's on the order of 8 to maybe, let's say 10 to 15 feet in that range. But it would be dependent on the other assumptions when we get into these analyses.
And the difference between a 30% shortage and a 10% represents how many acre feet of water?
In a single year, this is an extended period, so it's not quite that linear, but 20% on this scenario is about 10,000 acre feet a year. Yeah. What you're not seeing in here is the import of San Francisco supply, our ability to bring in semi-tropic supplies, which changes from one year to the next. So it's not all reflected in that dip
So
there.
it's really the cost of purchasing through some other supply means 10,000 acre feet.
It's more than that. The scenarios that we're looking at now are not just the supply so much as storage.
Yeah, storage.
Yeah. It's to have a place to park that extra water. It's not so much the water, it's the infrastructure needed to make that water available when we need it.
Right.
That this is directly in competition with if we were to study this more.
So before we go too far, I want to open it up to see if we have any public comments or questions on what's being presented. No? Okay, hearing none. Laura?
Yeah, so I think we just kind of wanted to transition a bit at this point, and just for the benefit of the folks who weren't here right at the beginning, we just wanted to share, we're sharing sort of conceptual examples today, and what we're talking about is simply looking at planning level scenarios for our water supply planning. We're not proposing operational changes at this point or looking for board actions or any of that, so just wanted to reiterate that for the group. And at this point, we're happy to answer any questions on what's been presented, and we would love some board input and feedback on this, proposal of taking a look at some of these different kinds of scenarios. So I will turn it over to those that might want to ask questions or provide us
Any comments on the board?
Well, I'd like to ask Madam Vice President,
Yes.
would it be okay if our guests introduce themselves?
Would you be willing?
Sure.
Yes, please introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Tom Crum. I live at 4629 Paseo Padre. Above the Hayward, or yes, above the Hayward.
Welcome.
I'm Jan Lee. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works for the City of Hayward.
My name is Ken Mann. I'm with Steve Mann. I'm Project Manager for GMP Development.
My name is Shannon Beth, and I'm a ACWD customer. Katie James, I'm with DWR.
Welcome. Thank you.
And actually, I should just mention one quick thing. I know, Director, we couldn't be here quite yet, and it's arriving later, but I did want to share that you sent us a question or a thought earlier today about exploring operating at higher levels and looking at scenarios at higher operations of the groundwater basin. And just what we found in the past is that results in little additional storage, which suggests a diminishing benefit at attempted, further recharge of the basin with going to higher levels. So but I wanted to make sure we recognize that was something that he had brought up to our attention.
Yeah, but just so there's no confusion, staff's recommendation is to maintain the 20 feet maximum below the Hayward Fall level. And I think what staff is asking the directors is, we're not asking to make some sort of decision tonight, but to basically say, either it's okay for you to take a look at this and bring it back, show us if there's any impact, show us how it impacts other potential water supply initiatives. But if the answer is not no, or I'm unsure, but heck no, then we want to know that, because as Mr. Neiser explained, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into this. But I think we think it's worthwhile taking a look at it and just kind of looking for some nods.
Do you want to go down the road, Director Sethy?
Oh, I'm entirely supportive of going with what the staff is recommending. I think you should look at all these possibilities.
I'm comfortable with the approach that we're taking.
Me too. I think we should explore the option. I guess my question is, do you have the tools you need? I think, Thomas, what you're saying is we have to what you imply is that we have to improve the modeling, right?
Yes, and I think the short answer, let me take a stab first. I'm sure you've heard groundwater is already brought an RFP or even a proposal for developing a new groundwater model. Our planning model is built off of theirs. And our planning, the groundwater model has lots of history being down 40 feet below sea level. For planning's sake, we never looked at that, so we're not calibrated to sync up with theirs. So the core work needed for this is on our smaller model, but the benefit of the new model, which will also be evaluating sea level rise, which will be a critical component of, because it's just increasing that differential, will be critical for really robust analysis of the risk and the sustainability of this proposal.
Thank you. Just want to make sure you have the tools you need.
Yeah, they're basically on their way. We just need to do a little bit of in-house work on our side
I'm
of the
not
house.
going to geek out on you and ask you about the boundary conditions. I think
Let me tell you about them. Great. Anything to add to that, Michelle?
No, I think that's great. I think that it's just like when we went through all the other looking at the undesirable results. We're also looking at how other operators within the basin could potentially be impacted. So like once we get the upgraded groundwater model, that'll be a huge function.
Actually, I do have a request, now that Michelle brought that up.
Okay.
So I know we usually model using the worst case scenario in terms of the weather pattern, right? That's what we did.
Yes, historic weather.
The historic weather pattern. Is there any way to run the model in a way that to tell that for how long we could sustain?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the question.
And that will certainly be part of that analysis.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one nice thing. That's a stress test where we don't need to rely on what San Francisco and state availability. We can just hold the model down and see at what point it becomes a limitation.
Right. That's actually the condition I was looking for. Okay.
Fabulous question. Thanks for asking and getting that
Thank you.
clarification out there.
I'm a little curious, what are you using for your modeling computationally?
We are actually now all working in Microsoft Excel. It is brought over. We used to have a proprietary model that was worked to interface with CalSim, which is what the state uses. And I basically took all that code years ago and put it into Excel, which is kind of a crude form of basic programming, and we run it all on Microsoft platform now.
Is it worthwhile tapping into any AI or neural network systems that
We
do forecasting?
do that.
Huh?
We do that. Our optimization model, which we use to do optimization routines, uses artificial intelligence as part of the kernel for coming up with how to optimize within the parameters we feed into it. So we actually do use some degree of that.
Cool.
We have some of the coolest models. We actually have one biased, but I think we have one of the best groundwater models in the state.
I don't disagree. I think our groundwater model and our groundwater staff are some of the best modelers in the whole region. And I've worked with a lot of them.
Mike thinks you from afar.
His ears are burning, but I've told him that many times directly. So, anything else?
I think you got the answer,
Yeah.
your questions answered,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so
I think
let's
that's
move on.
We're going to transition to our next topic, which is recycled water planning and direction, and I believe we have Mr. Leonard Ant covering that. Oh, yes, that's right, sorry. Honestly, kicking that off. Mr. Leonard, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Ms. Hydas. So stepping back to our next item for tonight is direction on recycled water planning. When we talked about the IRP strategy, we had our objectives, our policy objectives, criteria, and then strategy elements. Recycled water was a key strategy element from the 1995 IRP. And so we're talking a little bit about that history and then some recommendations for staff for what we think would be a prudent change of direction in how we approach recycled water planning at ACWD. Starting with a little background, we have been evaluating recycled water since at least 1992. That's the oldest study I found. I've heard even word that it goes back to the 70s. In our 1995 IRP, we identified a two-stage development of recycled water, with the first leg coming online by the year 2010. I think that still is happening. That's a joke. We didn't build this because we've continued to evaluate it, and we found that there's problems with recycled water implementation within our service district. The second phase would expand that to 2,700 acre-feet by the year 2020. That's also a little bit behind schedule. Also a joke. It's not happening right now. Part of the recommendation, though, was to continue evaluating potable reuse as a future technology improves. So that was in print in the 1990s. There was acknowledgement that this is an emerging, with the technology, the capability existed. We had potable reuse in California at this time. It just wasn't very streamlined. And so the recommendation was to continue to monitor that and reevaluate the potential with time. Wanted just to establish a little bit so we all know what we're talking about, why recycled water was recommended in 1995 for future development. Basically, at the time, since this was the remaining source of supply that was available, a reliable source of supply, everything else would be speculative. So when the district saw the need for new supply, develop recycled water was the recommendation. The specific way it worked, as we know, it's non-potable supply can only be used for manufacturing and irrigation. So what we said at the time is the way it works is, well, you have an existing demand for potable supply, let's just displace that with this non-potable supply. And then we could take that freed up water and put it in semi-tropic so that we could keep our off-site banking higher, and we also could leave more water in the groundwater bank so that when we get into droughts, we would have more potable supplies available. One key thing that recycled water did is also displacing demand for potable production. So our treatment plants at the time wouldn't need further expansion. It shaves off peak month demand, and so that was a key benefit. And finally, that was a critical part of meeting the 150 ppm under the previously anticipated high demands. We were looking at summertime demands at 80 mgd. And if you had all that irrigation demand being met at our blending facility, we simply couldn't meet the 150 ppm blend. So those were the sort of key things behind the recommendation for recycled water in 1995. With that, I invite Mr. Leonard Ash up here, Water Resource Engineer, to discuss a little bit more about where we are with recycled planning.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So as Mr. Neiser said, I'll be here tonight to talk about our recycled water planning. And our planning at ACWD has continued since the 1995 IRP. In fact, beginning in 1993, the district collaborated with Union Sanitary District to investigate the use of recycled water. That was the non-potable wastewater reuse master plan, and it was followed by 4 more studies that were conducted in 2000, 2003, 2010, and 2015. And earlier this year, the district has started its 6th study with USD, this time partnering with San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to look at the next frontier of recycled water. So the first step in all of these past studies has been to conduct a market assessment, and that evaluates both the current and the estimated future demand for non-potable water. As a future supply, non-potable concepts have always depended and assumed that there'd be greater demand for water in the future. And this assumption was critical to justify the development of such a costly alternative water supply. A non-potable program has very high unit costs because of O&M costs to treat wastewater that are typically higher than treating potable supplies, but primarily the large capital cost associated with building a separate, dedicated, non-potable distribution system. Unlike other agencies that are successfully using recycled water, the district has some challenges for application of recycled water for irrigation. One major factor that we contemplate when evaluating the potential future customer base for using recycled water for irrigation was the possible impact to our underlying groundwater basin. Namely, we called a recharge protection zone, an area generally east of Interstate 880 that would be precluded from application of recycled water to avoid affecting the Niles Cone groundwater basin. As a result, previous recycled water studies proposed a non-potable recycled water user service area generally located west of Interstate 880, located along a spine that would begin roughly at USD's wastewater treatment facilities, going down Union City Boulevard, Cherry, Boyce, Cushing, and southern Fremont Boulevard. This spine, or backbone, of purple pipe would target the potential non-potable recycled water demands that occur along that spine. And this separate, dedicated, non-potable distribution system alone was the largest capital cost component identified in the recycled water studies. For example, in the 2010 study, 84% of the capital cost went to the cost for the dedicated non-potable distribution system. Given the large expenses for non-potable capital costs, during the intervening 26 years since the recycled water studies began, the district has opportunistically installed lengths of purple pipe in the designated recycled water area whenever development activity occurred. And over the years, that's totaled roughly 4.2 miles of pipe. And those are the segments that you see highlighted in thicker purple bars on your map. But while the district has been installing that non-potable distribution pipelines over the past 2 decades, the market assessments have shown a continuous decline for future demand for a non-potable supply. And there are 4 key factors that are reducing future demands. First, a reduction in water-intensive manufacturing due to globalization. Secondly, the elimination of 2 previously planned future golf courses. Thirdly, shifting public sentiment toward lower operational costs and drought-tolerant landscaping, coupled with our turf replacement programs. And fourth, a suite of state-imposed regulations which, in combination, have reduced current and future demands for water. 2 examples of those post-drought include our water-efficient landscape ordinances that are getting more restrictive for water use, and our generally the water use efficiency requirements that have followed the drought. So you combine these 4 factors with the limited application for recycled water for irrigation that I showed on the previous slide to protect our groundwater resources. The net result is a decline in existing customer demand and an almost complete elimination of those future demands that we had anticipated to use non-potable recycled water. So I want to present a graphic. Since the large implementation costs of a non-potable program are mainly due to the construction of the purple pipe distribution system, and remember that was 84% of the costs in our 2010 study, the cost feasibility of a non-potable system is highly dependent on the level of demand for non-potable water. So thus the declining demand has resulted in accelerated unit costs for a non-potable project. So the trend we see is smaller yields, which is the red line, and you can read the axis on the right. So we started with over 4,000 acre-feet per year in earlier studies, and that's decreased to about 1/3 of that in our most recent study. And that has a direct impact then on inflating capital costs that result in higher unit costs. So the axis on the left, you can see that those unit costs have increased nearly 3-fold, from roughly 3,000 acre-feet per year to over 9,000 acre-feet per year. Or $9,000 per acre-foot, excuse me. So the recycled water study that we completed in 2015 and 16 builds off of that trend that we're seeing. So given the declines in the non-potable viability, as well as changing in drinking water regulations, the district, along with Union Sanitary District's recycled water feasibility study in 15-16, was expanded to include an evaluation of indirect potable reuse. And we use the acronym IPR. So in recent years, IPR has become more appealing as an option due to advancements in treatment technology, successful multi-decade operations of several successful IPR projects across the state, and corollary with that, a demonstrated safe reuse for treated wastewater to supplement raw water supplies. That results in a more favorable regulatory environment and more streamlined permitting for such projects. Now, the 2015-16 study looked at an IPR project to use advanced treatment to purify wastewater to drinking water standards, then convey that to our groundwater recharge, and as an added safety factor, that advanced treated purified water would be introduced through recharge to the Cone groundwater basin, where it would undergo natural filtration and dilution with other raw water sources before being produced as a potable supply at the district's groundwater production facilities. Now, USD and ACWD have joined with San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to expand on this previous study to look at how an expanded partnership, including SFPUC, could result in higher yield concepts for greater potential reuse. The district was encouraged by the 2015-16 study's findings on potable reuse. We found in that 2015-16 study that over 4,000 acre-feet of additional recharge supply could be provided by an IPR project at a lower cost than a non-potable recycled water project. You see here in this graphic is an alternative concept that was evaluated at that time to repurpose the Alvarado Niles pipeline to convey that advanced treated purified water from the USD wastewater treatment plant property to quarry lakes for percolation into our groundwater basin. While the potential for use of non-potable recycled water does decline and costs go up, the study evaluated potable reuse and found the greater potential for new supply and possibly lower unit costs. So that's, at this point, given the present high cost and lowering yield of non-potable recycled water programs, combined with the continued decline in demand for such uses of recycled water, it's staff's recommendation that the district's vision for recycled water be focused on potable reuse options. Now, you may remember in the past we've talked about a 2011 IPR review that staff did where we analyzed the concept of delivering raw groundwater as an interim measure to customers who are already connected to the installed segments of Purple Pipe in our distribution system, in our service area. And that would occur prior to the development of a non-potable supply. It was concluded that this concept held promise as a bridge until the district develops new non-potable supplies, as it would help support the development of the non-potable distribution system and would use less expensive raw groundwater as an interim supply until recycled water supplies became available to the district. Now recall that the use of recycled water, the use of raw groundwater in the non-potable system would not be creating a new supply, but merely shifting the supply that goes into the non-potable system to a less expensive source, raw groundwater, as opposed to its current source, which is potable distribution system water. However, if the district does not pursue a new supply of non-potable water, the suitable delivery in this system, the benefits of this interim concept don't justify the cost and operational complexity that it would create. In short, if building the non-potable system could be a cost-saving measure, it would make sense to pursue it as a standalone project. However, our economic analysis shows that this concept on its own is not cost-effective. So as a result of the large capital costs of developing that dedicated non-potable distribution system, those capital costs outweigh the savings of the potential use of less expensive sources of supply. So the concept of continuing to develop a non-potable distribution system no longer makes financial sense if there's not going to be a future recycled water non-potable source for that system. Therefore, it's recommended that the district no longer pursue this concept either. And so that leads me into our second recommendation of the evening. The district no longer pursue the construction of a Purple Pipe network to support a non-potable distribution system. Now, the next steps on how the district will approach recycled water in our planning efforts is that recycled water will remain a potential future source of supply to the district, especially in light of uncertainties with reliability of our existing supplies. The district staff, in coordination with Union Sanitary District and San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, will continue to endeavor to refine evaluation of recycled water as part of that purified water feasibility evaluation that just started this year. And as part of the district's next review of the Integrated Resources Planning Study, the district will continue to evaluate the potential timing for a recycled water project in our service area. So at this point, I will pause to see if you have any questions about this segment regarding recycled water.
Dr. Akbari, questions? Okay, then I'll open up to our members of the public. Do I hear questions from our public members? No, hearing none. Okay, actually no questions on me either. I'm just glad to see the direction we're in.
All right. Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Heides for the wrap-up and conclusion.
Yeah, just one quick comment I think I'll make. About 10 years or so ago, about 10 years or so ago when we started looking at some of the issues of aging infrastructure and addressing the over 900 miles of pipeline in our distribution system and ultimately replacing them, it occurred to many of us that, maintaining all of that infrastructure is difficult enough. And building a parallel system of purple pipe without really having a sufficient customer base that could take advantage of it started looking like it didn't make financial sense. And as Mr. Ash explained, the successes in the state of doing sort of indirect potable reuse, and who knows, maybe someday direct potable reuse, kind of had our thinking evolve to, where we are now. And we're kind of at this crossroads where, should we be using district resources to continue working on that sort of parallel system or not? And what you heard is where we kind of landed. And obviously, protecting human health will remain, and the environment will remain job one for ACWD, but we're not the only agency beginning to think like this. And being able to utilize the one distribution system for these purposes, it just seems to make sense to us.
So I think we did want to also pause here for any questions or comments and kind of make sure that, we're moving in the right direction, that the board gets a chance to weigh in on this sort of concept and direction. If you guys have anything specific you want to share, we're happy to listen, or any objections. It's always good to know as we're moving forward.
Well, I'll just repeat myself for members of the public here. I've said this for 10 years or more. It's far too expensive to do recycled water in our district. It just doesn't make economic sense. So I'm fully supportive of staff here. I think it's worthwhile pursuing the study with San Francisco and USD. Doesn't hurt. I still question the economics. At the end of the day, who's going to buy water at $4,000 or $5,000, maybe $8,000 an acre foot? If San Francisco wants to pay for it, I'm all ears.
Can I ask for clarification? To be completely clear, when you said recycled water, you meant potable and non-potable both, by inference from your second statement. You think that potable reuse is also too expensive, but you're open to studying it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one hypothetical question, though, that I've been wondering about. I've been over a number of times to the San Jose water purification plant built by Santa Clara, and I like the taste of the water. It's pretty good, so I'm not concerned about that. But would there ever be the possibility, they're doing about 4 MGD a day down there. They've spent all the money. They plan on doubling, I think, the size of the facility. Could we ever build a pipeline directly into our district if we wanted potable, purified water?
Yeah, we have studied regional recycled water programs with cross-border sharing of supply. At the time it was non-potable, but there's no reason to preclude in any sort of supply.
Because they're looking for customers. Just a thought.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a good thought.
And as part of the BAR effort, the Bay Area Regional Reliability Effort, I believe these are some of the alternatives that came up. And that particular alternative didn't rise to the top of the 13 or so. that the Bay Area agencies are pursuing on a regional basis. But I believe it was evaluated, and these things come back.
Well, I just want to make a side comment. I believe that Santa Clara spent over $80 million to build a plant that is operating at 4 MGD.
Being used to irrigate grasswood.
Right. So you can just imagine if we had to build our own recycling plant at, let's say, the same capacity, 4 MGD, it would be a really big financial undertaking for the district.
But it's good to have as a resource in case we need it. It's just that the board has made decisions previously to pursue less costly alternatives, like the desalination facility. And that's not to be disparaging to any agencies that have pursued recycled water. It really depends on the local situation. In Southern California, for example, not having to pump water over to the Tehachapis is a big power savings that allows some recycled water systems to pencil out much quicker than, say, it would in our area. Also, areas that aren't yet developed pencil out a lot quicker because it's a lot less expensive to put purple pipe in the ground with development as opposed to an area that is largely built out like our area is.
And I have stated before in public that my comments are really limited to our area of jurisdiction and service, that recycled water makes sense in a lot of communities, but you really have to go and look at the economics and the business case for each one. So over in the Tri-Valley area and up to San Ramon, Danville, it makes perfect sense. That's the most reasonable cost of water in the long term for those communities. On this side of the hill, and for protection of or with the availability of our Niles Cone aquifer, it just doesn't make any sense. And I get asked this question all the time in the community. Why aren't you going to recycled water? And my answer is, do you know how expensive it is? Are you willing to pay for that water?
Director Akbari?
Well, I'm comfortable with the approach that staff has laid out. Originally, prior to joining the board, I was more inclined on pursuing recycled water quite strongly. But I think based on the conversations that we've had and within committee and in other board meetings and again tonight, I think the approach that we're taking is much more pragmatic. So I'm supportive of that approach.
Thank you. I'm also supporting of that approach. I still like recycled water, but even Ms. Recycle Water fanatic here has to admit that if it doesn't make any business case sense to our district, then it's not worth us going down that path. I can't remember what I want to say. I think we're very lucky as a district. We have other cheaper options and alternatives we are looking at. That's why recycled water doesn't make sense for us at this point of view, but it is worthwhile for us to keep an eye on, as what you're proposing, and I think at this point we will have to admit that non-potable reuse is dead. The cost of putting in the pipeline, maintaining the pipeline just won't ever come at this point. So by all means, keep track of the events in technology, the change in regulations, and keep on looking at IPR. So, but thank you for presenting it, and so we can make a definitive conclusion that we will just not pursue those parallel pipelines.
And I did want to also acknowledge to Director Weed had sent us a comment related to use of wells for irrigation water using existing purple pipe, and that was kind of what Mr. Ash covered as part of the non-potable concept that we have looked at. So, any questions
So you
on that?
have one disappointed colleague.
Right, I was going to thank staff for bringing that up, because I meant to bring up Director Weed's point of view, since this is a recurring concept that he's been presenting. But thank you for addressing it for us.
Great. Any other questions on that particular topic? Or okay, then I think we're ready to wrap up. And we left this slide blank because we weren't sure what all would be discussed and what conclusions we might come to tonight. But it's been a very speedy discussion, I think, today. And it sounds like in terms of the use of dry year groundwater reserves, the board is supportive of looking at some of these different alternative scenarios for a long-term planning of exercising more cycling on the 5 miles cone. And so we'll be hard at work on strategies moving forward to get that work done. And then on water reuse planning, we had a couple of board recommendations that we just showed here to move towards a potable reuse concept and move away from a purple pipe concept. So I think that's the wrap-up that I had and our conclusions, unless anybody's had anything that we've missed to share. Then last but not least, we will just talk real briefly about next steps. We anticipate a couple of additional workshops in this sort of series of workshops in the pre-IRP update phase here. March 2020, we'll be bringing back to the board some water efficiency master plan updates, and at that point we may be reviewing some of our planning strategies and modeling results that we're going to be working hard on. April 2020, we anticipate potentially doing a preview of our 2020 urban water management plan and other planning topics. And then as we're working through some of these different issues and scenarios, we may bring some specific sort of one topic items to some regular board meetings to kind of keep the momentum and interest on this process moving forward. So that is the plan that we have, and happy to answer any questions. And we are very appreciative of everybody's input tonight. This does help us tremendously as we delve into the details for the long term. We're looking forward to coming back with our future discussions as well. So.
Yeah, just one comment that I think when we're coming close to the presentation of the water efficiency master plan, the urban water management plan, that we really try to engage the public in both of these, and our cities, some of the other governmental agencies, school districts, things like that.
Okay. Any other comments?
No?
Then thank you very much, Ms. Titus, and thank you to staff. Great presentation. Thank you for putting this together. With that, shall we move on to General Manager's report?
Certainly. One quick item. Mr. Ahrens would like to update the board on potential PG&E power disruptions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Shaver. Just want to let the board and other staff know that we were just notified that PG&E is planning a public, what was it? Public? PSPS. Well, I can't get the name. Event for Alameda County, likely to start Sunday or Saturday evening and go through until Monday. Right now they're just saying about 57,000 residents in the county, but that's all we know. So we don't know. They haven't provided any maps or anything as of yet. So we'll be preparing in case it's similar to the last one, and then reacting on as we get more information. But there is a possibility of being affected this weekend.
So is PG&E going to update us at a periodic basis at a set time? Because we do need to make sure our generators, our backup generators, are in the right place.
Yes, exactly. And we'll be working on that in the morning. We'll be deploying generators, probably similar to what we did during the last event. But hopefully PG&E has learned, and they say they're going to communicate better. There's also a county EOC call tomorrow afternoon that we'll participate in that usually provides additional information.
Just make sure you have a different communication path that's not their website that keeps on crashing.
Yes.
How long do we expect this shut off to last for?
Right now they're saying from about 5 o'clock Saturday evening until Monday at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. That's when the high winds and the fire danger are supposed to be the highest. And I'll provide an update. If something does occur, I'll let the board members know.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and just one other quick item. Director Weed has texted me. He's very interested in items 7 and 8 on the agenda. His estimated time of arrival, he's on BART now, is 6:15.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
All right. Should we go through director's comments really quickly, and then we'll take a break, a recess, until Director Lee shows up for item 7 and 8?
I have no comments or requests.
None from me either, so why don't we go to a recess? It's, 5:37? And we will be adjourned hopefully by 6:15 or whenever Director Lee shows up. Thank you. So, I guess our next item is item 7.1.
Yes.
Like to lead.
Madam Vice President, item 7.1 involves the potential acquisition of the N3 Cattle Company property and also to appoint district real property negotiators. And the N3 Cattle Company property involves a number of parcels, 131 parcels. Your board packet should have information about all those parcels. And staff's recommendation for your real property negotiators, at least initially, would be myself, General Manager Robert Shaver, and Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, Mr. Ed Stevenson.
Okay. So that will be a motion, right? To appoint.
Correct.
Okay, so I have a motion to appoint the General Manager, Mr. Shaver, and Mr. Ed Stevenson as our negotiator.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Guthrie.
So with that, I guess we're moving on to item...
Was there a roll call earlier that I need to be part of? Showed I'm not attending the meeting.
So Director Weed, we just note in the meeting minutes that you arrived at a certain time. So I'm going to
Thank
put
you.
around 6:15.
All right.
Thank you. All right, so item 8.1, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property is N3 Cattle Company, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessors' parcel numbers were furnished by owner's representative and are attached to the agenda. And agency negotiators shall be Mr. Robert Shaver and Mr. S. Stevenson. The negotiating parties are the N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Ren Jr. and Ren Jr., what the TR is, I have no idea.
Presumably trust.
Trust, and under negotiation, price and term payment.
And just so that the board knows, the parcel information was provided by Mr. Todd Renfrew of California Outdoor Properties. I asked Mr. Renfrew, because he initially said that all the parcels were owned by N3 Cattle Company, LLC, why there were a few parcels with the other designation. This is a list. He said that that was from the county assessors and that information is going to be corrected.
Okay.
But in the interest of just providing the information that was provided to us by the owner's representative, we left it as is. Okay?
Okay. All right, with that, shall we get into a closed session? Where are we going to be?
We're going to adjourn to the administrative conference room, and it looks like it is 6:22.
All right.
Okay, we're good.
All right, we're back in session. It's 8:07. So, General Manager, would you read what has transpired in this closed session, please?
Thank you, Madam Vice President, in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property was the N3 Cattle Company consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda, Santa Clara, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties. Assessors' parcel numbers were furnished by the owner's representative and are attached to this agenda. The agency negotiators were Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson. The negotiating parties are the N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Wren Jr., and Wren Jr. Trust. Under negotiation, the price and terms of payment, and during the closed session, the board provided direction to its negotiators.
All right, with that, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Yay!
That's
8:08.
Eight.
Wow, you're quick.